Welcome everyone to the RIS webinar, The Price is Right, Strategies for Omnichannel Pricing, which is hosted by RIS News and presented by Revionics and the Parker Avery Group. Hello, I'm Joe Skorupa, Editorial Director of RIS News, and I'm really glad you could take the time out of your busy schedule to be with us today. You know, today's omnichannel shoppers want convenience and transparency into products. They want all of that into pricing and availability. And they want it online, in the store, and on their mobile devices. To keep in step with the now consumers, retail leaders need to consider the trade-offs between profits and customer value. In this live webinar, experts from Revionics and the Parker Avery Group will outline the pros and cons of single-price and differentiated pricing strategies for multi-channel and omnichannel retailers. We will explore when retailers should choose price discrimination and when they should not choose it. We will also highlight key factors that influence customer acceptance of differentiated pricing and key benefits from harnessing the power of price optimization tools. Now here today to talk about these important topics is Jeff Moore of Revionics and Josh Pollack of Parker Avery. First, a little background on our panelists. Josh Pollack is an associate partner for Parker Avery who leads the merchandising practice for the firm. Josh has more than 20 years' experience in the retail industry focused on strategic planning, merchandising, merchandise planning, replenishment, allocation, forecasting, price optimization, space planning, and promotions. He has held top-level positions at several large retailers and specializes in leading clients through strategy development, process design, organizational design, change management, package selection, and software implementation. Josh has authored several publications about pricing and is frequently interviewed by the media about merchandising and other key retail topics. So, hey, glad you could be here today, Josh. Welcome to our retail pricing panel.
Thanks, Joe. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yeah, it's really an important topic. And, Josh, we're going to be joined today by Jeff Moore, who is the Chief Science Officer for Revionics and who oversees the science and analytics functions at the company. In his role as head of the science team, he oversees the strategy and development of the analytical core of Revionics lifecycle price optimization solutions, comprising demand modeling, forecasting, simulation, and optimization capabilities. The science team focuses on predictive analytics, optimization science, and the technologies and infrastructure required to deliver Revionics pricing solutions at scale. Additionally, the team is responsible for development and delivery of value-add analytical services, including store clustering, customer segmentation, and demographic analysis, as well as value measurement and strategic opportunity analysis. Welcome to our webinar series, Jeff. Glad you could be here today.
Joe, Josh, thank you so much for having me. I am very happy to be here.
And many of the things that we just read on the background for Jeff and Josh, we're going to be covering in some detail here, so that serves further as a little bit of a highlight for things to come. So stick around if you're interested in pricing. We really have some interesting data and recommendations for you. Now, a quick note to our audience. We want to make the session as interactive as possible because your feedback is important to us. So please use the web tools on your screen and send us questions or comments at any time during the webinar. We will definitely use your feedback to shape our discussion to cover the topics you want to hear about. Now, also, we will have an interactive polling question in this session to gauge your perspective about the key topics we're discussing. So please look for that to appear on your screen, and please participate so we know a little bit about you and your organization. So again, let's make this webinar as interactive as possible. I guarantee it will be more fun and informative that way. Let's get started. Okay, Josh, let's begin with you. And, you know, I have to say that retailers have always considered differentiated pricing, which in my, a brief shorthand way, would be based on different prices for different channels and other factors that might be regional, for example, or local. Now, they've always considered that as a key way to achieve incremental margin gains, but then Omnichannel exploded, and this forced a shift toward unified pricing thanks to search engines and other online methods where shoppers could find prices everywhere. Tell us your view about how retailers can thread the needle, so to speak, and maybe achieve a little bit of both in the omnichannel world. So take it away, Josh.
Thanks a lot, Joe, and thanks very much to everybody who dialed in. I really appreciate it. So just to set the stage, I'm going to concentrate my remarks today on regular, everyday retail pricing as opposed to promotional or markdown pricing. But bear in mind that any comprehensive pricing strategy would have to account for these other two factors as well. But Joe, I maintain that we are currently in an age of disruption with regard to omnichannel retail pricing. Technological advances are creating two opposing forces that are driving regular pricing policy. The first force is the improved ability to price discriminate, and that's caused by the proliferation of price optimization tools and new price localization mechanisms, and this is pushing toward more differentiated pricing. And just to make sure we're clear on terms, when I say differentiated pricing, I mean prices are targeted to different customers or customer groups based on their purchase behavior, and in particular, the elasticity characteristics that they exhibit. Meanwhile, there's an unprecedented increase in price transparency due to the spread of online retailing, the explosion in customer touchpoints, and the availability of comparative shopping technology. And this is pushing more towards enterprise pricing, by which I mean that prices are consistent across customers and across customer touchpoints. So as a retailer, in deciding which path to take, I need to consider and balance three main factors. The first is, as you've already mentioned, the incremental margin that can be derived from differential prices versus enterprise pricing. But going along with that is the ongoing cost to deploy differentiated pricing versus enterprise pricing. And finally, but not least, the negative impact on customer perception should they become aware of price discrimination. Now, let's take a deeper look at the considerations driving retailers toward differentiated pricing. The move to differentiated pricing is driven by the availability of tools in the form of software that's capable of scientifically generating and executing localized prices. And the second is retailers' desire to capture margin that can be created by differences in customers' willingness to pay for a particular item. And then to a certain degree, the increasing acceptance of price discrimination by customers. And to illustrate this last point, let's take a look at the travel industry as a model. The travel industry has been price discriminating for longer than most of retail, 20 to 25 years or even more. But when they first developed the capability, customers complained bitterly about it. In fact, we still do. But it has been such a profitable practice that it has become ubiquitous. And now it's simply considered the price of doing business with airlines and hotel chains to put up with price discrimination. And some retailers are assuming that their business will follow the exact same path. Now, there are real benefits to be gained from a differentiated pricing strategy. The first is incremental gross margin dollars, and this is typically cited as being between 2 and a 5% increase in gross profit for items under management. And to be sure, this is a very attractive incentive for pursuing differentiated pricing. But another benefit is the improved ability to respond to local competitors' pricing. So let's say you compete on a national scale, but have regional competitors that use a different pricing strategy, like a low-price leadership approach. Differential pricing would allow you to respond to the local competitors' pricing in nearby stores without taking the margin hit on the rest of the chain. This can also be applied in cases where you've got an online-only competitor. You can respond to them in that channel using a differentiated price strategy without having to do the same thing in your entire store base. Now, let's say that differentiated pricing is your preferred strategy. If that's true, then you really need to develop a price zoning approach. And that's because it's typically infeasible to treat each outlet as its own pricing zone unless you've got a very limited number of stores. And in determining those pricing zones, you need to consider a variety of factors. The first is regionality and cross-shopping behavior. If your store saturation is high in a particular market, or your customers tend to shop multiple of your stores within a market, then you may be concerned about customers discovering price discrimination. In this case, you need to create regional price zones, and this will ensure that stores in the same area share similar prices. Another is competitors. As we mentioned before, you may wish to structure your pricing zones around the presence of regional competitors if you wish to respond to their prices in a localized way. Marketing. If you promote a lot using mass media, such as newspaper circulars or radio or TV ads, you may consider creating price zones built around media buying constructs, such as MSAs for radio, DMAs for TV. This will allow you to present consistent pricing messages to each market, and it'll also help assure that you can maintain compliance with any local laws related to promotional pricing. Elasticity. With this approach, stores are grouped together based on the price elasticity behaviors of the customer base of each store. The elasticity approach creates geographically dispersed zones, but captures the most margin potential. And Jeff's actually going to talk about this at some length during his portion of the presentation. Cost to serve. Competing in certain markets entails high costs, typically from freight or higher rents. Examples include Alaska, Hawaii, Manhattan. And customers expect to pay more in these markets, so your zone strategy may want to take these into account. Sales channels. You have websites, mobile sites, catalogs, and retail stores, and they may have different competitive sets and exhibit different price elasticity behaviors. So it's a good idea to consider breaking different sales channels into different price zones. Now, it's important to stress that no matter what your price zoning approach is, appropriate policies and employee training on how to effectively handle customer pricing questions must be in place to reduce potential negative customer perceptions. So, having explored differentiated pricing at some length, let's turn our attention to the enterprise pricing strategy. Now, the move to enterprise pricing is driven by a couple of factors. The first is that an increase in customer touchpoints between stores, your website, mobile retail, social media, kiosks, direct email, broadcast marketing. It is very difficult to isolate pricing messages to a distinct customer or group of customers. We've also all heard the statistics that support that omnichannel customers are typically the most profitable segment. But these are also the people who are most likely to discover price discrimination. On top of that, younger and more tech-savvy customers are less tolerant to price discrimination than their elders. There was a RIS Cognizant study that was done in 2011 that showed that 40% of millennials strongly dislike price discrimination compared to 20% of their elders. And there's evidence that the tolerance is waning even more. A more recent study in 2015 by Accenture revealed that 82% of shoppers expect prices to be identical both in store and online. So the situation is not likely to get better as these consumers grow to dominate the economy. And finally, the mechanisms for isolating price messages, particularly online, are cumbersome and they're far from foolproof. Now, while retailers who choose an enterprise pricing strategy may be foregoing some incremental margin that's associated with price discrimination, there are still significant benefits to this approach. First of all, it's easier to enable and execute and maintain enterprise pricing than a zone pricing approach. It requires lower investment in systems and few, if any, process upgrades. It's easier to manage and execute and predict the effectiveness of promotions and promotional pricing in an enterprise pricing environment. It reduces the risk of being wrongly identified as being a gouging or a deceptive retailer in regard to pricing. And even further than that, it reduces the risk of potential legal action brought about due to pricing discrimination. And there have been a couple of conspicuous examples in recent years where retailers have been accused of overcharging by state attorneys general. And whether these cases have merit or not, the negative press can be very damaging to a company's price image and the overall customer perception. Finally, adopting an enterprise pricing approach may actually reinforce a price leadership position and could provide a potential differentiation opportunity from competitors that do price differentiate. Now, with all of these considerations, which strategy should a retailer adopt? The answer is, it depends on the nature of your business model. For example, your product offering. The more commoditized products that you offer, say books or DVDs, the harder it is to price differentiate compared to proprietary items, such as not broadly distributed products, private label apparel, that sort of thing. Also, the higher the degree of treasure hunt in your value proposition, the lower the expectation that prices will be consistent. Cost to serve, as we've already said, prices can be higher in markets where customers recognize higher cost factors. High versus low involvement purchases. Customers are less price sensitive for low involvement purchases like, say, mouthwash, than high involvement ones such as a refrigerator, which represents a big-ticket item that's expected to last a long time? What's your ability to isolate price messages to distinct customers? Customers should be presented with the same price information wherever they look for it. And then finally, the age and tech savviness of your customers. Younger, more technical customers are more likely to discover pricing inconsistencies and have demonstrated that they are less tolerant of price discrimination. Joe, back to you.
Well, thanks a lot. It's a great introduction, a great way to look at what's happening today with price transparency. And let's face it, the tools that consumers have, in the palm of their hands for pricing search engines. And, so many retailers really don't want to give up the ability to have differentiated pricing. And so I think you've laid out the benefits and the risks as well for kicking us off here. We're going to dive into some of those points in a little bit, but right now this is the section of our webinar where we bring up our interactive polling question. And our polling question on the screen has to do with retailers who might be changing their approach to omnichannel pricing. And I think what we're trying to find out here is how you're evaluating your options and how you're considering changing your pricing strategy. And please read the question and answer which one applies best to you. The four options we've included here, the top two have to do with actually, changing your approach. So the first one has to do with moving away from single pricing, which we're calling enterprise pricing, to differentiated, which is, multiple pricing dependent on various zones and categories. Are you moving from single to differentiated? If so, please check one. If number two would be moving from differentiated, which many retailers had before transparency revealed their pricing strategy to shoppers and actually scared them away from it. So are you moving from differentiated to enterprise pricing, which is single pricing? Now, the other two are not a movement. Number three has to do with getting better at your existing approach, no change, just getting better at it. And number four has to do with a pricing approach that is pretty traditional, using Excel spreadsheets, and makes choosing the right strategy challenging because it's typically based on processes and a rearview mirror approach, and not a lot of factors that can be dynamic and help make the pricing choices more accurate. So, Josh, I want to bring you back in here, and so I think you laid out the benefits and the risks with both enterprise and differentiated, and we're going to see if their retailers are moving in either of those directions. But as you go along and talk to your retail clients, what do you see them struggling with?
Well, I think what they're struggling with is that typically they've made a decision to go down one path or another, and they're feeling kind of buyer's remorse because there's either direction, there's pressure and backlash that they need to deal with. Maybe they've experienced some negative press or negative comments on the website about pricing or impact on customer experience, or it could be that they just see missed opportunity in terms of margin that they could be collecting. So there's a lot of feeling of oats out there in the marketplace. On top of that, the initial generation of price optimization tools that are out there has been aging, at least the implementations have. And so we see a lot of attention that's being paid right now toward decisions about whether to upgrade existing tools or switch to newer, maybe more cutting-edge tools that have become available since the initial set of tools exploded onto the marketplace.
So let's, Josh, let's bring Jeff into our conversation. We're going to jump right over to him and get some of his expertise in a second. But as we're finalizing our look at our interactive polling question, Jeff, I can tell you from looking at the results here, we'll probably have a few more updates for it. But right now, about a third of our attendees are moving in one direction or another, but nearly half are taking the approach that we're not moving in either direction, either to enterprise or differentiated. We're really going to try to refine our existing approach. Now, it could be that the third that are moving in one direction or another are those that are a little more advanced or a little more of the, of the innovative spirit. But is this a picture of results that you would have expected when you thought we were going to ask this question and considered how it might turn out?
Yeah, it's not at all surprising. The retailers that we work with, we have retailers who are using a highly differentiated, highly targeted pricing strategy. We have other retailers who are using a unified strategy, and there really is no one-size-fits-all. A lot of the points that Josh brought up about the level of purchase engagement, given the product assortment, the level of intensity of competition in local areas can really drive a lot of these decisions, as well as the nature of the business and the presence of competing products online. All of these play into the decision, and there really is no one-size-fits-all. And even within a given retailer, I think there's a very good argument to be made that some product areas may suit a localized strategy better than others. We like to make data-driven decisions, so there's no requirement that a retailer pick one or the other. A hybrid strategy is perfectly viable, but we like to see people bring some data-driven decisions to bear in those cases and look at what the data tells us about shopper behavior in terms of deciding which way to go or where differentiated localized pricing makes sense versus areas where it may be more of a risk factor.
Well, just to summarize and then move on, now that we see more final numbers in, that there is more than 50% of attendees who have decided not to make a move, and they're going to refine their current approach. But if we were to give a very slight nod to either enterprise or differentiated, if you are going to make a move, it looks like there's a very slight edge going to enterprise or single, moving from enterprise or single to differentiated pricing, which theoretically would give, and I think you're going to talk about this immediately after I turn it over to you, would give incremental margin gains. So with that said, let's really fascinating details, something I've never actually asked before in any of my surveys. So with that said, Jeff, let's jump over to you, and let me tee you up a little bit and point out that pricing, unlike some skill sets in merchandising, involves much more science than art. In fact, it's probably fair to say that effective pricing is based on what I'm going to call known knowns, meaning it's analysis of many relevant data sets. So tell us about how retailers can use science and analytics to achieve their pricing goals. So take it away, Jeff.
Thank you very much, Joe. So at Revionics, we work with retailers across a very broad range of industry segments, including grocery, convenience, specialty goods, apparel companies, and without exception, every one of the retailers we work with is confronting this challenge of whether to go with a differentiated, localized pricing strategy or an enterprise strategy. And as we've kind of hit upon, there's no one-size-fits-all. There's no right answer that applies to everyone. It is a strategic decision and a strategic choice. But in terms of looking at some of the trade-offs in localized versus enterprise pricing, we pay attention to a lot of the things that Josh talked about earlier, including level of engagement of the purchase, customer characteristics, demographics, store characteristics. And when we look at what drives a high involvement purchase, is the term that Josh used, we have a lot of characteristics that we see pretty consistently reinforce higher price sensitivity, and that goes along with many competing product options that are highly substitutable, ability to stockpile or pantry load, lack of product loyalty, comparatively high price points are associated with higher price sensitivity in general. People pay more attention to items that are going to lighten their wallet to a greater extent, and the converse is also true. So we see these patterns of high involvement purchase driving greater price sensitivity, and the converse of that as well. So as an analytics company, we're primarily involved in helping retailers to make data-driven decisions. So we want to share with you some of the techniques and data that we bring to bear in helping retailers to implement a localized pricing strategy and to quantify the benefits and trade-offs in so doing for those retailers that do decide that a localized pricing strategy makes sense. And so part of those analytics are tied to what we refer to as store zone clustering, and that means composing pricing groups that balance the opportunity to be gained from a differentiated localized pricing strategy against the complexity in implementing that, and that goes to technology, to people, to processes, to ability to address competition at a local level, but also with certain constraints such as trying to maintain perhaps within a metropolitan area a unified price image to customers so that if you do have customer price shopping, we're not giving them a confusing price message. So balancing some of those considerations while bringing the analytics to bear to understand what some of the value opportunities in localized pricing can bring is really what this is all about. So quantifying the benefit is a real key consideration in understanding how we're going to balance the benefits to be gained from localized pricing against the complexity of implementing the strategy. And so we actually look at the elasticity characteristics at the store level and do micro-optimization simulations as we cluster stores together into smaller and smaller groups. And you can see here in this graphic we're quantifying the benefit. And there is a diminishing returns characteristic as you go to more and more granular all the way down to store level pricing. And that diminishing returns comes about because stores become more and more similar the smaller the cluster sizes are. But it's really understanding the similarities in customer response to differentiated pricing that helps us to drive these clustering decisions and then simulate outcomes to quantify the benefits in so doing. And in every case, we're helping retailers to find the sweet spot that helps them to get, say, 80% of the benefit with the least amount of incremental effort in terms of technology, process, and labor to implement the prices. So in the course of doing this, again, the technique involves looking for similarities in shopper sensitivity to price at the store location level and clustering stores accordingly. And doing that maximizes the opportunity from pricing optimization to address those customers and get the price that's going to maximize outcome financially. And again, quantifying those benefits, Josh quoted 2 to 5% profit opportunity. That's been very consistent, having done dozens of these with some of the retailers we work with. 2 to 5% is a range that's pretty consistent with what we've seen in terms of total value opportunity. And so clustering for similarity at the store location level helps us to address that opportunity and balance the trade-off between opportunity and ease of implementation. So on top of just pure elasticity analysis, we pay a lot of attention to the characteristics of individual store locations and customers that are really responsible for differentiated price sensitivity. And this is a capability we refer to as demographic clustering, but this involves taking store attributes, which can be customer demographics, it can be proximity to competition or level of overall competition within a proximity to a store location. It can have to do with population density, store characteristics and attributes, different types of store layout, whether it's in a strip mall versus a standalone building. All of these attributes we bring to bear and put through an analytics process that's known as principal components analysis. But that helps us tease out which attributes can demonstrably be seen to explain differences in shopping price sensitivity. And in so doing, we produce the set of attributes for a given retailer that are most associated with differences in response to pricing. So we can actually look at what those factors are, and this is a sample set of different factors that come out of this analysis, ranked from most important to least important. So you can see by the presence of latitude and longitude as the number 1 and number 6 factors respectively, there's kind of a geographic correlation, and that popped out as being an important factor. High growth population areas were associated in this case with higher price sensitivity. sales per square foot. So this is a store attribute that this particular retailer had some different store layout formats, and in some of those formats they tended to associate with a higher urbanicity environment, and that correlated with higher price sensitivity as well. So we can tease out what factors there are. Proximity to Walmart, you can see, is one of those down at the bottom that showed up as an important factor. And that actually raises a very important point, that for a localized pricing strategy, you have the ability to take the intensity of competition into account in structuring the localization strategy for pricing and address competition locally. With an enterprise strategy, you lose the ability to address competition locally, and in so doing, you're really forced to take a compromise price across the entire chain, and that's where a significant part of the value opportunity comes, is by being able to be locally relevant and address the competition. The counterpoint to that are all the points that Josh already mentioned, that there really are counterpoints that customer price perception can be damaged, and differentiated pricing can equate to price discrimination, which has a negative customer connotation. And with the advent of the internet, pricing transparency is increasing the risk of those negative connotations bearing out. But when we look at how customers respond to price differentiation, and we can actually plot out the store locations once we've gone through some of the analytics that we talked about, and see how people in different areas really respond to price. And we see comparatively that different metropolitan areas with different characteristics really respond differently to price. And that differentiation in customer price sensitivity translates directly to differentiated value opportunity from a differentiated pricing strategy. So to put a little bit of weight on the other side of the scale, this slide illustrates what we frequently refer to as the fundamental paradox of omnichannel pricing. So what this slide is showing is a distribution of price sensitivity for items for a customer that has both brick-and-mortar channels and online presence. So the same items are sold both in the brick-and-mortar channel and in the online channel. And this pattern we see repeated pretty pervasively for the customers that we work with that are omni-channel retailers that have both brick-and-mortar and online presence. The online price sensitivity is almost universally higher. And so this is an empirical reinforcement of what I think people kind of intuitively understand already, and that is that where it's easier to switch, which the online environment, pricing transparency, the ease of looking at competitor prices, the ease of switching to competitors is much easier. And so it is the case that price sensitivity is correspondingly higher versus the brick-and-mortar channel. And so the reason we refer to this as the fundamental paradox of omni-channel pricing is that the lower comparative elasticity in the brick-and-mortar channel tells us that basically it will sustain a higher price than the online channel, where people are comparatively more price sensitive. However, in so doing, over time, it's reasonable to assume that people will start to see that you're pricing more in the brick-and-mortar channel if you take such an approach, and will then be trained to always go to online. And that'll just further reinforce the pricing transparency, some of the showrooming effects and things that are really pushing people more towards the single unified pricing approach. So the fact that differentiated pricing works today, that may not always be the case. And in the future, if you believe the narrative that pricing transparency is only going to increase, and that the brick-and-mortar world is going to begin to resemble more the online world, meaning very high degree of pricing transparency, ease of switching, things of that nature, then it starts to undermine over the long run some of the benefits potentially of the differentiated and localized pricing strategy. Now, there's very good reason to believe that that transition won't be uniform, and a lot of the factors that Josh discussed earlier involving the degree of involvement in purchase, the nature of the product, the price point of the item, that all of those things are going to impact the rate of transition as prices become more transparent, and the brick-and-mortar behavior begins to more and more resemble the online behavior that we see. So that brings us to promotions, and where in base pricing a differentiated strategy can have negative connotations tied to price discrimination, where promotions are concerned, targeted promotional offers can really improve customer engagement because you're giving them demand-relevant offers. And so for customers that do choose an enterprise pricing strategy for base pricing to give a uniform and consistent view, some of that value opportunity is still available through differentiated promotional pricing. And arguably, the value opportunity in a differentiated promotional strategy is even greater than what is available through a differentiated base pricing strategy. And so for customers that do take an enterprise approach, we strongly encourage them to try and gain some of the incremental benefit available from differentiated pricing through a promotion strategy that really targets offers to the right customers in the right locations based upon their demand characteristics. And so as a simple illustration here of the differentiated demand characteristics by region, we had a customer that we looked at their demand for pool accessories in different parts of the country, and we picked out 4 stores in particular, which you can see here. So we've got a Florida store in blue, an Arizona store in red, and then we have a New York store in green and a Michigan store in yellow there. And to the right is what we call our seasonality model. It's a normalized view of product demand within a category or group of products over time. And you can kind of see how these things vary for the different store locations. And some of the things that jump out in terms of those patterns there are that, first of all, Florida and Arizona are very similar, which is not at all unexpected given the comparatively warmer weather. And you can see that the blue and the red seasonality traces overlap significantly. But a couple other things that you notice, the Arizona and Florida demand starts to kick up in the March timeframe, and March, April, May, there's comparatively much stronger demand for pool supplies, presumably because it gets hotter earlier there, people start swimming earlier. On the other hand, in Michigan and New York stores, we see a much stronger response around the July 4th holiday. So that big spike that you see there is tied to 4th of July. And so we've got a comparatively greater demand response around the 4th of July holiday. So this just serves to illustrate that there really are differentiated demand patterns that are really addressable, and structuring a promotion strategy to address differentiated demand patterns can help you to be relevant, local in terms of the offerings to the customer, resulting in better customer engagement. And that engagement can even go below the store location level down to targeting individual customers and customer segments. And those are things that we like to encourage customers to, our retail customers to think about. If they're going an enterprise strategy, really should think about how they can differentiate their offer in the promotional sense, yielding a lot of the benefits of localization, but fewer of the negative connotations associated with price discrimination. So those are some of the things that we bring to bear and some of the data elements that we talk with our retailers about when we're talking about implementing a localized pricing strategy. And with that, I'll go ahead and hand it back to Joe.
Well, thanks a lot. I think that was a really good look at using data to get a deeper understanding of pricing. And one of the things I was taken with toward the end of your presentation there, Jeff, was you talked about differentiated demand patterns. For example, seasonality, that would be certainly one of the demand patterns. And I was also thinking that there's a lot of other differentiated pieces of data to look at. So, for example, of product availability, whether it's in stock in the stores, in stock in the warehouse, coming through the supply chain. But then there's also differentiated product availability among competitors. So having the data to look at all of those differentiated patterns will lead to a better getting the prices right, which is what we're basically talking about here. So thank you for that presentation, and let's bring Josh back into our discussion, and let's cue everyone here on our webinar to note that we are going to be talking about your questions and your comments. As you can tell, there is a lot of good food for thought coming through in both Josh's and Jeff's presentation. We did find out that approximately a third of you are moving from either differentiated to enterprise or enterprise to differentiated, and more than half of you are trying to get the current mode of pricing and make it better. And so definitely, retailers are searching for incremental margin gains, and they're doing it in various ways. So I'm going to start with Josh and ask Josh a question around the actual definitions, a little bit more of a deep dive in differentiated pricing and enterprise pricing. One of the things that I will say, my understanding is that enterprise pricing, single pricing, is kind of, if I were to interpret it, and Josh, you may totally disagree, it's kind of a margin killer in a way. It does not allow a flexibility for a retailer to make small adjustments that can actually, using chain math, if it's a chain retailer, can actually add up. So I'd like to get your interpretation of that, if that's how you look at enterprise pricing. And then also differentiated pricing, if you could dive a little bit deeper into that and say, is that actually more difficult and complex to do to get it right so that you're not actually turning off any of those millennials you talked about or anyone else who feels there's discrimination going on? So a little bit of a deeper dive into both of those would be appreciated, Josh.
Sure. I think I tend to not think of enterprise pricing quite so much as a margin killer, although you are clearly foregoing some potential measurable margin per unit by going with an enterprise pricing strategy. The question is whether customers will ultimately put up with price discrimination, or whether having an enterprise price strategy actually could become a source of competitive advantage in the future world. So it may be that you'd be sacrificing some margin in the shorter term, but in the longer term, you may be winning customer perception and ultimately, therefore, winning a business. The other thing is that even retailers who are very adept at creating and managing differentiated prices run into challenges because it's an incredibly complex undertaking. And what I've talked about so far a fair amount, and Jeff has talked about, is the mechanism for determining what price zones are, and to a certain extent, the mechanism for determining what the differentiated prices would be for each one of those zones. But then there's a whole other execution aspect of that pricing which can get very complex, especially when you've got situations where you've got item-level pricing as opposed to shelf-level pricing. Then you need to find ways to segregate price tags either in your warehouse or back at your manufacturer, or put the onus to do actual pricing of products onto your store operations team, which is a whole set of complexities associated with that. There's a lot of complexity associated with being able to price discriminate but present consistent prices to a customer no matter where it is that they shop you. And that's the element where I feel like most retailers today that price discriminate fall down. And that's why I think that they subscribe to the idea that customers will just eventually get used to price discrimination, and they're hoping that that's the case because the incremental margin is so attractive that they're hoping that all of retail will go the way that travel went.
Josh, let's bring Jeff in. You sort of provided a good segue here, a topic I wanted to raise with Jeff, and that relates to zone pricing, localized pricing in clusters. And it seems to me, Jeff, that if you have that kind of data and you can apply it and you can have logical groups, you really need one other thing, it seems to me. You actually need the tools, the merchandise pricing tools to actually, use those categories and clusters that you're coming up with. And that would be on top of the other types of clustering that you're already doing. So now if you got multiple variants at work here, I think that probably takes a pretty sophisticated tool to do that, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And the tools have really come a long way. I've been in the price optimization space for north of a dozen years now, and the tools really have evolved over time. From comparatively simple black box, highly algorithmic, science-driven solutions to real enterprise solutions that can help retailers at the upper end manage a differentiated or an enterprise pricing strategy and scale that out and be able to tackle the challenges within the tool of things like differentiated prices in the base arena, whereas our promotional segments, our promotional ad zones may differ in terms of composition for our base pricing zones, and how do you resolve some of those inherent pricing conflicts or make sure that we manage and provide visibility to those things. But the tools have gotten a lot better, not only in terms of the sophistication of the analytics, but also in terms of the ability to manage conflicts, provide visibility to places where prices are misaligned. In general, the tools have just gotten much better over the last decade plus to the point that they're able to help people manage those things. But the availability of good tools to do that really is critical to being able to do it right, I think, to your point. Yeah,
and as as Josh said, it is complex to do differentiated pricing. And let's just, this will probably be our final comment, Jeff, am I correct in assuming that enterprise pricing is equally complex but in a different way? So, for example, the complexity might come in developing really accurate and really effective clusters, as opposed to being, dynamically changing or creating scenarios.
Yeah, enterprise pricing is certainly easier to execute logistically, but in terms of defining the strategy, you're absolutely right. You need to consider more things. And we can show, some of the data we showed today illustrates that there's demonstrable differences in different parts of the country and different customer types in terms of how they're going to respond to price, what items they care about, seasonality of demand. And when you take an enterprise approach, you're having to come up with a consensus strategy that's going to try to do the best job of addressing all of those things. So giving up the granularity in a differentiated strategy, you're giving up the ability to address locally, and that means you need to make some hard decisions about which competitors do we care about, realizing that some of those competitors may be fierce competitors in parts of the country but not others. So how close are we going to hew to them? Are we going to pursue a race to the bottom type strategy where we're always, chasing the lowest competitor out of a whole field of nationwide competitors? By giving up the granularity, you inherently give up a lot of the control. What we help customers to do is provide the tools to help them simulate and understand some of the financial implications of those strategies, to bring some real analytics to bear in helping them understand the trade-offs. So if we're going to take a particular competitive posture with regard to a field of competitors, what do we think that's likely to do in terms of margin impact and things of that nature? So to your point, enterprise pricing gives you a lot more to think about in that you are coming up with a consensus or kind of an overarching strategy that really needs to balance across the differing demand characteristics of your entire customer base nationwide, and that is a lot to think about and bring together in one place.
Well, if the attendees listening in here are like me, there were many, many areas I would love to follow up with you, but unfortunately, and Josh's comments too, unfortunately we are running out of time. That's going to have to wrap up our web conference for today on truly a fascinating topic and very critical to retailers. For anyone wishing to revisit this presentation or wishes to tell their colleagues about it, we will be posting it on the RIS News website at www.risnews.com. And I want to thank our outstanding panel today, for being here. Certainly, one of the top-of-mind topics. And Josh Pollack, I really wanted to thank you for bringing your perspective from the Parker Avery Group. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks, Joe. It was a real privilege, and thank you, everybody, for dialing in again.
And Jeff Moore from Revionics, thank you for being on our panel. Really terrific insights from the data scientist perspective.
Josh and Joe, thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity.
And for everyone listening in today, please know that this is one of our regular RIS web sessions. Join us again for our next one, and have a great day.